Girl discovers a rope in the sea. When she tries to pull it, something shocking happened. The nightmare always started the same way. A dark figure standing at the edge of the water, throwing something heavy into the waves under the cover of night. 17-year-old Lena Morton would wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of splashing water echoing in her mind. She'd been having this recurring dream ever since her father disappeared at sea 5 years ago. That fateful Tuesday afternoon in October felt different from the moment Lena stepped onto Sea Vale Beach. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon, promising one of those fierce storms that frequently battered their small coastal town of Port Haven. The weather matched her mood perfectly. Earlier that day, she'd overheard her mother talking about selling their beachfront house, the last connection they had to her father. "We can't keep living in the past, sweetie," her mother had said that morning, not knowing Lena was listening from the stairwell. "The insurance money is running out, and this house, it's too big for just the two of us now." Those words had sent Lena fleeing to her sanctuary, the beach where she'd spent countless hours with her father, learning to build sandcastles, collect shells, and read the patterns of the waves. He'd been a marine biologist, passionate about the ocean's mysteries. "The sea keeps more secrets than all the world's spies combined," he used to say with a playful wink. As Lena walked along the shoreline, her worn sneakers leaving perfect impressions in the wet sand, she noticed something unusual. The receding tide had exposed a thick rope partially buried in the sand, its weathered fibers intertwined with strands of dark seaweed. Normally, she wouldn't give such debris a second glance. The beach was often littered with fishing gear and pieces of old nets. But this rope was different. For one thing, it was too thick to be ordinary fishing rope, easily as wide as her wrist. The material looked expensive, more like something you'd see securing luxury yachts than catching fish. But what really caught her attention was how it disappeared into the water at an odd angle, suggesting it was attached to something beneath the waves. A sudden gust of wind whipped her dark hair across her face, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The smart thing would be to head home before the storm hit. Instead, Lena found herself kneeling in the sand, her fingers reaching for the rope. The moment she touched it, that familiar nightmare flashed through her mind, the dark figure by the water's edge. She nearly pulled her hand away. "Don't be ridiculous," she muttered to herself. "It's just a rope." Gripping it firmly, she gave an experimental tug. The rope was heavy, resisting her pull with surprising force. Whatever lay at the other end had significant weight to it. Lena's heart began to race. In all her years of beachcombing with her father, she'd never encountered anything like this. She pulled harder, planting her feet firmly in the sand. The rope creaked but held strong. Small drops of rain began to fall, speckling the sand around her. The logical part of her brain screamed at her to leave, to come back another day with proper tools and maybe some help. But something deeper, perhaps the same intuition her father had praised her for, urged her to keep trying. "Come on," she growled through gritted teeth, wrapping the rope around her hands for better leverage. "Show me your secret." Thunder cracked overhead, closer now. The rain intensified, but Lena barely noticed. She was fully absorbed in her task, adjusting her grip and pulling with all her strength. Her muscles burned with effort, and sweat mixed with raindrops on her face. Just when she was about to give up, something shifted beneath the waves. The rope suddenly went slack, causing her to stumble backward. When she regained her balance, she saw movement in the water about 20 feet out. Something large was slowly rising to the surface. Lena's hands trembled as she continued to pull, now with renewed determination. The thing beneath the waves was dark and angular, definitely not natural. As it emerged further, she could make out what appeared to be metal, covered in barnacles and rust. Her mind raced with possibilities. A piece of old machinery? A sunken boat engine? But when the object broke the surface, Lena's breath caught in her throat. It was a safe. A large, old-fashioned safe like something from a bank vault in an old movie. The sight was so unexpected, so out of place, that she actually laughed out loud, a sound caught somewhere between disbelief and excitement. The rain was coming down in sheets now, but Lena barely noticed. She stood there, soaked to the skin, staring at her impossible discovery. The safe was massive, easily 4 feet tall, its once sleek surface now transformed by years underwater into a canvas of rust, barnacles, and clinging seaweed. Questions flooded her mind. How did it get there? What was inside? And why did she have a nagging feeling that this discovery was somehow connected to her recurring nightmare? Lightning split the sky, illuminating the beach in harsh white light. In that brief flash, Lena noticed something that made her blood run cold. Near the safe's handle, barely visible through the marine growth, was a familiar symbol, the same logo she'd seen countless times on her father's research documents. This wasn't just any safe. It belonged to the Oceanographic Research Institute where her father had worked before his disappearance. The thunder that followed seemed to shake the very ground beneath her feet. Lena knew she needed help. This discovery was too big to handle alone. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone, protected in its waterproof case, and dialed the one person she knew would drop everything to help her, her best friend Mark Chin, whose father happened to own the local salvage yard. As she waited for him to answer, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she just pulled on a thread that would unravel mysteries far deeper than she could imagine. The nightmare that had haunted her for years suddenly felt less like a dream and more like a warning. "Mark?" she said when he finally picked up, her voice barely steady. "I need your help. And bring your dad's tow chain. You're not going to believe what I just found." The waves crashed against Lena's legs as she planted her feet firmly in the wet sand, her grip tightening on the mysterious rope. Each pull felt like a battle against the ocean itself, her muscles straining with effort. The thick rope cut into her palms, but she refused to let go. Something heavy lurked beneath the surface, and she was determined to uncover it. After several minutes of exhausting effort, she felt a shift in the resistance. The rope suddenly gave way slightly, causing her to stumble backward. When she regained her footing, she noticed the water about 20 feet out had begun to churn unusually. Whatever lay beneath was finally moving. A dark shape gradually materialized under the waves. At first, it appeared as nothing more than a shadowy mass, but as Lena continued to pull, more details emerged through the murky water. The object was far larger than she'd initially imagined, and definitely not the fishing equipment she'd expected to find. With one final heave, the mysterious object broke through the surface. Water cascaded off its sides as it rose from the depths, revealing a sight that made Lena's jaw drop. There, emerging from the sea like a relic from a sunken ship, was an enormous metal safe. The safe stood nearly as tall as she did, its once smooth surface now completely transformed by years underwater. Thick clusters of barnacles created crusty formations across its face, while rust had eaten away at its edges, painting abstract patterns of orange and brown across the metal. Long strands of seaweed hung from its corners like abandoned decorations, swaying in the ocean breeze. "This is impossible," Lena muttered to herself, circling the massive box. The safe appeared to be an older model, something you might see in an old bank vault or a wealthy person's study. Its dial was completely encrusted with marine growth, and the handle had corroded so severely it seemed to have fused with the front panel. She reached out to touch the rusted surface, her fingers trembling slightly. The metal felt cold and rough beneath her touch. When she attempted to turn the handle, it wouldn't budge. Years of rust and mineral deposits had effectively sealed it shut. Questions raced through her mind. How did something so massive end up in the ocean? Who would go to the trouble of sinking a safe? And more intriguingly, what could still be inside after all this time underwater? The sound of tires on sand pulled her from her thoughts. Mark's old pickup truck appeared on the beach, its wheels kicking up spray as he parked nearby. He jumped out, toolbox in hand, but stopped dead in his tracks when he saw what Lena had discovered. "Holy smokes!" he exclaimed, his eyes wide with amazement. "When you said you found something weird, I was thinking maybe some old boat parts or a treasure chest. But this..." He approached the safe slowly, as if it might disappear like a mirage. "This is something else entirely." Mark circled the safe, examining it with the practiced eye of someone who'd grown up helping in his father's hardware store. "This isn't just any safe," he said, kneeling to inspect the lock mechanism. This is a Sovereign Series 700. They were top of the line back in the day. Completely waterproof, fireproof, practically indestructible. They stopped making them in the early 90s because they were too expensive to produce. Lena joined him in examining the lock. Can we open it? Mark shone his flashlight closer, frowning at the corroded dial. Not here. This thing's rusted shut tight. We'd need some serious tools to crack it open. He stood up, brushing sand from his knees. But I might know a place where we can work on it privately. Your garage? Lena suggested, remembering the impressive collection of tools Mark's father maintained. Better. Remember that old storage unit my dad keeps on the edge of town? The one where he restores classic cars? Mark grinned. It's perfect. Private, plenty of tools, and nobody around to ask questions. Getting the safe onto Mark's truck proved to be a monumental task. They used pieces of driftwood as rollers and the truck's winch to help with the lifting, but it still took nearly an hour of struggling before they managed to secure it. By the time they finished, both teens were soaked with sweat and seawater, their clothes stained with rust and bits of barnacles. As Mark threw a tarp over their discovery, Lena noticed something peculiar. Through a gap in the barnacles, she could make out what appeared to be engraved numbers. She used her phone's flashlight to get a better look. Property of First National Bank, asset number 47891. Mark, look at this. She called him over. This safe, it's from a bank. He leaned in to examine the engraving. First National? That's impossible. That bank went under in the 80s after that huge embezzlement scandal. My dad still talks about it. It was the biggest financial crime in the city's history. The implications of this discovery sent a chill down Lena's spine. This wasn't just any old safe. It could be connected to one of the most notorious crimes in their town's history. As they climbed into the truck's cab, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the beach. Lena couldn't help looking back at the spot where she'd found the rope. The tide was already coming in, waves washing away their footprints in the sand. By tomorrow, there would be no sign that this stretch of beach had given up one of its secrets. What do you think we'll find inside? Mark asked as he started the engine. Lena watched the beach disappear in the side mirror. I don't know, she admitted. But someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure nobody would find this safe. They must have had a pretty good reason. As they drove away, neither of them noticed the black sedan that pulled into the beach parking lot, or the man in a suit who quickly made his way to the water's edge, speaking urgently into a phone. The real mystery was only just beginning. Mark's father's garage was a cavernous space that smelled of motor oil and metal. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across the safe, which now sat in the center of the concrete floor like a waterlogged sentinel. They had managed to back the truck right into the garage, closing the heavy door behind them for privacy. Dad's got everything we need here, Mark said, moving toward a large red toolbox in the corner. Blowtorch, power drill, angle grinder, you name it. If we can't crack this thing open with these tools, it can't be opened. Lena circled the safe, studying its corroded surface. Now that they had better lighting, she could see more details they missed at the beach. The barnacles had created an almost artistic pattern across the metal, and beneath them, she could make out more of the engraved text they'd spotted earlier. We should document everything, she suggested, pulling out her phone. If this really is connected to that old bank scandal, we might need proof of how we found it. Mark nodded, already laying out tools on a nearby workbench. Good thinking. But first, let's see if we can get some of these barnacles off. They might be hiding important markings. The next hour was spent carefully chipping away at the marine growth. It was tedious work. They had to be gentle to avoid damaging any potential evidence underneath. Each removed barnacle revealed more of the safe's original surface, along with additional numbers and text that had been hidden. Look at this, Lena said, brushing away debris from near the handle. There's a manufacturing date stamped here, March 1982. That's right before the bank scandal happened. Mark whistled low. This is definitely from First National then. The timing matches perfectly. He picked up a crowbar. Ready to see what's inside? They started with the conventional approach, trying to work the crowbar into any available gap. But years of rust and mineral deposits had effectively sealed every possible entry point. The handle wouldn't budge, and the dial was completely frozen. "Time to bring out the big guns," Mark said after 30 minutes of failed attempts. He walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a professional-grade blowtorch. "Dad uses this for stuck bolts on classic cars. If this doesn't get us in, nothing will." The blowtorch cast an eerie blue flame across the safe's surface. Sparks flew as Mark carefully applied heat to the area around the lock mechanism. The metal began to glow red-hot, but the safe remained stubbornly sealed. "These old bank safes were built to withstand pretty much anything," Mark explained, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Fire, floods, explosions, they thought of everything." Just as they were about to try a different approach, they heard something. A distinct click came from inside the safe, followed by what sounded like metal shifting against metal. "The heat must have expanded the lock mechanism," Lena exclaimed. "Quick, try the handle again." Mark grabbed the crowbar and wedged it into the gap that had appeared. With a grinding sound that set their teeth on edge, the handle finally moved. The door creaked open slowly, releasing a rush of stale air that carried the scent of decades past. Inside, they found stacks of water-damaged cash bundled in old-style bank straps. The outer bills were largely destroyed, but the inner ones seemed surprisingly well-preserved. There were also several manila envelopes, their contents protected by plastic sleeves, and a small leather bag. "This is crazy," Mark whispered, carefully lifting out one of the bundles of cash. "These are $100 bills from the 80s. There must be thousands here." Lena's hands trembled as she reached for one of the envelopes. Inside, she found documents, bank records, transaction logs, and what appeared to be personal letters. The plastic sleeves had protected them from water damage, preserving their secrets for all these years. "Hold on," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Look at these dates. These records are from the week before the bank collapse. And these signatures." She pointed to a name that appeared multiple times. "Thomas Wheeler. Wasn't he the bank president who disappeared right after the scandal broke?" Mark leaned in to look. "Yeah, my dad mentioned him. They never found him. Some people thought he fled the country with the missing money. Others said he was finished by whoever was really behind the embezzlement." As they continued to examine the safe's contents, they found more intriguing items: a small key with no identifying marks, a pocket watch that had stopped at 3:47, and photographs showing people they didn't recognize standing in front of the old bank building. But it was what they found at the bottom of the safe that made their blood run cold. Beneath everything else was a sealed envelope marked "Confidential" in red letters. Unlike the other documents, this one showed signs of having been opened and resealed multiple times. "Should we?" Lena asked, holding the envelope with trembling fingers. Mark nodded slowly. "We've come this far." The envelope contained a single sheet of paper, a letter dated the day before the bank's collapse. As they read it together, their eyes grew wide. The letter revealed a conspiracy far deeper than a simple bank embezzlement. It implicated city officials, business leaders, and even law enforcement in a scheme that went beyond mere financial fraud. "This isn't just about stolen money," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is about..." She was cut off by a sound that made their hearts stop: car doors slamming outside the garage. Through the small window, they could see multiple vehicles pulling up, their headlights cutting through the evening darkness. "Someone followed us," Mark hissed, quickly gathering the documents. "We need to hide this stuff. Now!" But before they could move, they heard a key turning in the garage's side door. Someone else had access to the building, and they were about to find out who had been keeping these secrets buried for the past 40 years. The sound of footsteps echoed through the garage, growing closer with each passing second. In a moment of quick thinking, Mark grabbed the documents and shoved them under his father's workbench, while Lena hastily pulled a tarp over the opened safe. They had barely concealed their discovery when the side door swung open. To their surprise, it wasn't the police or bank officials who entered. It was Mark's father, Tom, still wearing his mechanic's uniform. He stopped in his tracks when he saw them, his expression shifting from surprise to something else. Was it recognition? "Dad," Mark stammered. "I thought you were at the car show in." "I came back early," Tom interrupted, his eyes fixed on the partially covered safe. Without another word, he walked over and pulled off the tarp. For a long moment, he just stared at the open vault, his face unreadable. Then, to their astonishment, he let out a heavy sigh. "So it finally surfaced," he said quietly. "After all these years." Lena and Mark exchanged confused looks. You know about this safe?" Lena asked. Tom pulled up a shop stool and sat down heavily. "I've known about it for 40 years. I was there the night they sank it." He looked at the teens with weary eyes. "I was just a young mechanic then, working late at my shop near the harbor. That's when Thomas Wheeler, the bank president, showed up with 3 other men. They needed someone with a boat and mechanical knowledge who could keep quiet." Mark retrieved the documents from under the workbench, hands trembling as he held up the confidential letter. "Then you know what's in here?" Tom nodded slowly. "The truth about what really happened at First National Bank. It wasn't just embezzlement, it was something much bigger." He took the letter from Mark and unfolded it carefully. "This proves that the bank collapse was orchestrated by a group of city officials and business leaders. They were using First National to launder money from illegal operations across the state." "But why sink the safe?" Lena asked, picking up one of the water-damaged stacks of cash. "Why not just destroy the evidence?" "Because Wheeler didn't trust his partners," Tom explained. "He kept everything as insurance, documents, transaction records, photographs, even lists of names. He knew if anything happened to him, someone would eventually find this safe. That's why they needed it hidden somewhere it could be retrieved later, not destroyed." Lena's mind was racing. "So what happened to Wheeler?" Tom's expression darkened. "The night after we sank the safe, Wheeler disappeared. The official story was that he fled with the stolen money, but..." He paused, struggling with a memory. "I saw him get into a car with 2 of those same men. He didn't look like someone making a getaway. He looked scared." Mark was examining the photographs they'd found. "Dad, some of these people in the pictures, they're still in positions of power in the city, aren't they?" "That's right," Tom confirmed. "The current mayor was just a city council member back then. And that man there," he pointed to a figure in one photo, "is now the police commissioner. They've spent decades building their power and influence, all while people believed Wheeler was the sole criminal. We have to take this to the authorities," Lena declared, gathering the documents. "Not the local police," Tom said quickly. "If the commissioner is involved, we can't trust them. We need to." He was cut off by the sound of vehicles pulling up outside the garage, multiple engines, car doors slamming. Through the windows, they could see the distinctive black SUVs that marked government vehicles. "FBI," Tom said, a hint of relief in his voice. "I called them on my way here when I recognized my truck at the beach. I've been waiting 40 years to make this right." The garage door burst open, and agents flooded in, weapons drawn. But they lowered them quickly when Tom held up his hands and called out, "Agent Morrison! Long time no see." A tall woman in a dark suit stepped forward, holstering her weapon. "Tom Chin. When we got your call about the Wheeler safe finally surfacing, I could hardly believe it. We've been working this case for decades. The evidence is all here," Tom said, gesturing to the safe and documents. "Everything Wheeler kept as insurance, proof of the money laundering, the illegal operations, the real conspirators behind the bank's collapse." Agent Morrison examined the documents with growing excitement. "This is it, the smoking gun we've been looking for. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to ongoing conspiracies, and these documents prove the same group has continued their operations through other banks." As the FBI agents cataloged the safe's contents, Lena noticed something they missed: a small USB drive hidden in the lining of the leather bag. It looked newer than everything else. "Agent Morrison," she called out, holding up the drive. "This wasn't here in the 80s. Someone must have accessed the safe more recently." The agent's eyes widened as she took the drive. This could contain updated information about their current operations. Tom, your call today might have helped us crack not just a 40-year-old case, but an ongoing criminal enterprise. What about Wheeler? Mark asked. What really happened to him? Agent Morrison shared a knowing look with Tom. We've had a theory for years, but no proof. We believe Wheeler was planning to expose the entire operation. The safe was his insurance policy, but someone in the conspiracy must have found out. The night after the safe was hidden, Wheeler was supposed to meet with an FBI informant. He never made it to that meeting. The two men I saw him with, Tom added quietly. They were both found finished within a year. Apparent accidents. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. So when I found that rope on the beach, you uncovered more than just an old bank scandal, Agent Morrison finished. You exposed a criminal conspiracy that's been operating in this city for over 40 years. And now, finally, we can bring them to justice. The garage was now a hive of activity, with FBI evidence teams carefully documenting and collecting everything from the safe. As Lena watched them work, she realized that her simple beach walk had led to something far bigger than she could have imagined. A 40-year-old mystery was about to be solved, and the truth would shake their city to its foundations. But one question still nagged at her mind. If Wheeler had been silenced all those years ago, who had added the USB drive to the safe? Someone else must have known its location, must have accessed it recently. The mysteries of the sunken safe weren't over yet. They were just beginning to unfold. As the FBI evidence team continued their work in the garage, Lena and Mark found themselves seated in Agent Morrison's temporary command center, a converted RV parked a block away. The weight of everything they'd discovered pressed down on them like a physical force. The USB drive they'd found was now connected to a secure FBI laptop, its contents potentially holding even more explosive revelations. Before we go any further, Agent Morrison said, her expression serious, I need to discuss something important with both of you. She placed a thick file on the table between them. This case isn't just about a decades-old bank fraud. What we're dealing with here could impact thousands of lives, and some very powerful people will do anything to keep their secrets buried. Lena felt her throat tighten. Are we in danger? The agent's pause before answering was telling. We can offer you protection. The FBI has a comprehensive witness protection program. Witness protection? Mark interrupted, his face pale. You mean leave everything behind? Our families, our lives? It would only be temporary, Morrison assured them. Just until we can secure indictments and make arrests. But there's something else you need to consider. She opened the file, revealing photographs of familiar faces, their neighbors, teachers, local business owners. The corruption in this city runs deep. Many people who seem innocent are actually involved. We need to be extremely careful about who knows what you've discovered. Tom, who had been quietly observing from the corner, spoke up. I lived with this secret for 40 years, always looking over my shoulder. I don't want that life for my son. The implications of their discovery were starting to sink in. This wasn't just about turning in evidence, it was about potentially uprooting their entire lives. Lena thought about her mother, still grieving her father's death, finally starting to rebuild her life. Could she ask her to leave everything behind? What exactly is on that drive? Lena asked, watching as FBI technicians worked on decrypting its contents. Morrison leaned forward. Preliminary analysis shows recent banking transactions, offshore account numbers, and what appears to be a complete list of everyone involved in the conspiracy, past and present. But here's where it gets complicated. She pulled out a particular document. We found your father's name in these files, Lena. The world seemed to tilt sideways. My father? But he died 5 years ago in a boating accident. We don't think it was an accident, Morrison said gently. According to these records, your father was gathering evidence against the conspiracy. He was a whistleblower, working with a federal investigator to expose the whole operation. Tears welled up in Lena's eyes as the truth hit her. He was trying to stop them. And we believe he found this safe, Morrison continued. The timestamps on some of these files date to just days before his disappearance. He must have added the USB drive, but before he could get the evidence to us. Mark placed a comforting hand on Lena's shoulder. That's why you kept having those nightmares about someone throwing something into the ocean. You must have seen something that night, even if you didn't realize it. The pieces were falling into place, but they only made the decision more difficult. By pure chance, Lena had finished what her father had started. But at what cost? The USB drive implicated dozens of prominent citizens, judges, business leaders, even charitable figures who were beloved in the community. There's something else you should know, Morrison added, her voice grave. We found evidence that the conspiracy isn't just about money laundering anymore. They've expanded into other criminal enterprises, trafficking, environmental crimes. The money from First National was just the beginning. They've built an empire of corruption. Tom stood up, pacing the small space. All these years, I thought I was protecting my family by staying quiet. But I was just letting them hurt more people. A technician burst into the RV, his expression urgent. Agent Morrison, we've finished decrypting the drive. You need to see this immediately. The agent excused herself, leaving Lena and Mark to grapple with their decision. The right thing to do seemed clear: let the FBI use the evidence, enter witness protection, and help bring down the corruption that had plagued their city for decades. But the human cost would be enormous. My mom, Lena said softly. She'll have to know the truth about Dad. It'll break her heart all over again. And what about my sister in law school? Mark added. Her future career could be ruined just by association. They sat in heavy silence, weighing their options. Agent Morrison returned, her face grim but determined. The drive contained one more thing, a video file. It's from your father, Lena. He recorded it the night before he disappeared. She placed the laptop in front of them. You should watch this before making your decision. With trembling fingers, Lena pressed play. Her father's face filled the screen, looking exactly as she remembered him. If you're watching this, he began, then something has happened to me. But more importantly, it means someone has found the safe. Everything you need to expose their crimes is here. I know it's asking too much, but the truth has to come out. These people have hurt too many families, destroyed too many lives. Sometimes doing the right thing comes at a great personal cost, but the cost of staying silent is even greater. Tears streamed down Lena's face as her father's final message played out. He had known the risks, had died trying to expose the truth, and now that same choice lay before her. Mark squeezed her hand. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. We're in this together. Agent Morrison waited patiently as they processed everything. I need your decision. Will you help us bring these people to justice? Or should we find another way? Lena wiped her eyes, her father's words echoing in her mind. The choice was difficult, but deep down, she knew there was only one real option. The truth had been buried in that safe for 40 years, waiting to be discovered. Her father had died trying to expose it. Now it was her turn to decide, would she finish what he started, no matter the cost? 3 months had passed since the day Lena discovered the rope on the beach. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the moving truck being loaded with the last of their belongings. The witness protection program had given them a new start, a new home in a different state, new identities, a new chance at life. But before they left, there was one last thing she needed to do. The morning newspaper lay on her desk, its headline bold and unmistakable. Massive corruption ring exposed, dozens arrested in historic criminal enterprise. The story had shocked the nation. Respected community leaders, politicians, and business figures were being led away in handcuffs. The corruption that had gripped their city for 4 decades was finally being torn out by the roots. Lena picked up her phone, a new, secure one provided by the FBI, and dialed the number she'd memorized. Agent Morrison answered on the first ring. The last arrests are being made today, the agent reported. The commissioner, 3 judges, and the mayor's entire inner circle. They're all going down. Your father would be proud, Lena. The mention of her father brought tears to her eyes. The truth about his death had been hard to accept, but it had also brought a kind of peace. He hadn't abandoned them or died in a simple accident. He had died trying to protect his community from the cancer of corruption that had infected it. "What about the money?" Lena asked. "The original funds from First National?" "We've traced most of it," Morrison replied. "It was used to build their criminal empire, but we're seizing everything. The funds will be used to compensate victims and their families, including yours." That had been part of the deal. In exchange for their testimony, Lena's mother would receive compensation for her husband's wrongful death, and Mark's family would be relocated with full financial support. It didn't make up for everything they'd lost, but it helped ease the transition. Lena walked down to the beach one last time. Mark was already there, waiting at their usual spot. His family had moved last week, but he'd come back for this final goodbye. The familiar stretch of sand where she'd found the rope looked different now. Construction crews were working further down the beach, part of a federal investigation to search for other evidence that might have been hidden in the waters. "Hard to believe it all started here," Mark said as she approached. "With one random rope in the sand." "Maybe not so random," Lena replied. "I've been thinking about those nightmares I used to have. The figure throwing something into the water? I think I really did see something that night. I think I saw them sinking the safe, but I was too young to understand what I was witnessing." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "And all these years later, you were the one to find it. Like your dad knew somehow that you would." They walked along the shoreline together, remembering the events that had changed their lives forever. The FBI had managed to decrypt every file on the USB drive, revealing the full scope of the conspiracy. It wasn't just about banking fraud anymore. The organization had evolved into a sophisticated criminal enterprise involved in everything from real estate fraud to environmental crimes. Thomas Wheeler's body had finally been found, buried in the foundation of a building that had been constructed right after his disappearance. His family could finally have closure, and his name had been cleared. He hadn't been the criminal mastermind everyone believed, but a man who had tried to expose the truth and paid with his life. "Did you hear about the reward?" Mark asked as they reached the spot where the safe had emerged from the waves. "The FBI's asset forfeiture program is offering a percentage of the recovered funds to the people who helped break the case. We're talking millions." Lena shook her head. "I don't want their money. Mom feels the same way. We're donating our share to a foundation for families of whistleblowers." She pulled something from her pocket, her father's gold chain, recovered from the safe. "This is the only reward I need. Knowing the truth about Dad, understanding why he did what he did." The sun was setting now, painting the ocean in shades of orange and gold. In a few hours, Lena and her mother would begin their journey to their new life. New names, new home, new beginning. But some things wouldn't change: their strength, their integrity, their commitment to the truth. "The funny thing is," Lena said, watching the waves roll in, "most people will never know the whole story. They'll read about the corruption and the arrests, but they won't know about two teenagers who found a safe on the beach. They won't know about a father's sacrifice, or a 40-year-old secret finally coming to light." "Maybe that's for the best," Mark replied. "The important thing is that the truth came out. Justice was served." A car horn sounded from the parking lot, Agent Morrison, right on schedule. It was time to go. Lena hugged Mark tightly, knowing it might be months or even years before they could see each other again. "Stay safe," she whispered. "You too," he replied. "And hey, maybe in a few years, when all this is over, we'll come back," Lena finished. "We'll stand on this beach again and remember how one discovery changed everything." As Lena walked away from the beach for the last time, she felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. The rope she'd found had unraveled decades of corruption, exposed long-buried crimes, and revealed the truth about her father's courage. Some secrets, she had learned, don't stay buried forever. Sometimes they surface when they're needed most, when the right person is there to discover them. In Agent Morrison's car, Lena took one last look at her hometown through the tinted windows. The city would heal from this scandal, would rebuild itself on a foundation of truth rather than corruption. And somewhere, perhaps, other secrets waited to be discovered, other wrongs waited to be righted. The car turned onto the highway, heading toward their new future. Lena clutched her father's chain, feeling its familiar weight in her hand. She had followed in his footsteps after all, becoming a seeker of truth, a revealer of secrets. And though the cost had been high, she knew she would make the same choice again. Some mysteries end with their solution, but others live on in the hearts of those who solved them. The story of the safe in the sea would become a legend in their city, a reminder that the truth, like the tide, cannot be held back forever. It simply waits for the right moment to emerge, for someone brave enough to pull on that single thread that unravels everything.